In this simple presentation, I want to take you through simple things I think you need to know about LogFrames. The debate about the use of LogFrames has been going on now for well over a decade. Unfortunately, many of those involved in the debate have taken up rather entrenched positions, which I think is rather unfortunate because I think there's been a lot of changes that we need to be aware of since LogFrames were first used, which is in fact back in the 1980s when they were first used in international development work. They've changed a lot since they were first used. In recent years, DFID have updated their LogFrames, 2009 and then again in 2011. They've dramatically changed the whole format of the LogFrame. So there are new formats, there's new language used, there's lots of updates that people need to be aware of. The other point is that many organizations have increasingly used LogFrames as part of their results-based management systems, UNIDO, FAO, WTO, for example. I think the second point is that most development agencies are still using LogFrames, and we have to ask the question as to why this is. There are now a range of complementary tools, theories of change, for example, that have come, and in some cases already gone, but complementary tools that are useful, working alongside LogFrames, but they do not replace LogFrames, in my opinion. And I think we have to ask the question, why is this? I think the answer is very simply, the LogFrames are a practical tool, it's a very pragmatic tool, and in my experience of managing a number of projects and programs, it's a very useful tool. It's very useful for design purposes, it's very useful for monitoring, review, and evaluation purposes. And having been involved in a number of evaluation studies over the years, without LogFrames, without basic indicators, evaluation is simply virtually impossible. Thirdly, I think it's important to note that many of the critics of LogFrames have been academics. Academics who sit in ivory towers and have really sniped at LogFrames. They've not really looked at the practical experiences of LogFrames out in the field, how people have used them, and they've been a critique of the fact that it's a tool rather than the process. My interest in LogFrames is much more around the process of using LogFrames, how they're used, and the way they're used. Having said that, it's important to note that to date, there are no useful alternatives that I'm aware of that have been developed to replace LogFrames. In this slide, this illustrates some of the advantages of LogFrames as we teach them. For me, they've become a very important, powerful communication tool. People can look at a LogFrame if they know how to read it carefully, and start asking the pertinent questions very quickly. Having said that, for all the advantages of LogFrames, it's important to remember that there are disadvantages, there are downsides to LogFrames. And in my opinion, development professionals, people working with LogFrames, really need to know what these disadvantages are. Back in the 1980s, Gasper critiqued LogFrames very well, pointed out a number of problems with LogFrames, and these problems still stand. I think it's important that people using LogFrames know these disadvantages so they can actively work to overcome these disadvantages. The EU, for example, still use LogFrames in a rather rigid manner, but having been involved in managing 3 very large EU programs over the past 10 years, I can see that LogFrames are still very useful and have guided the implementation of the programs that we've been involved with. The sixth point is that in an age of austerity, LogFrames are very important for accountability purposes. I have to say, many people I've worked with out in the field, many development professionals, don't like accountability. They like to be doing what they want to be doing. They don't like reporting. They don't necessarily like to be held responsible for delivery of results. But this is a really important aspect of logical frameworks, in my opinion. So they're very important for monitoring, review, and evaluation purposes. But perhaps most importantly, they're really important to help us document lessons that need to be learnt. We can go back to the LogFrame and say, what have we learnt? And then to help share those lessons from one project, one program, across with other programs and other projects across the globe. And that's a really important aspect for me. Finally, the 7th point I quickly want to make is that the capacity development of understanding LogFrames is still, in my opinion, very weak. Very recently, I came across a very large organization, a large international organization, still unbelievably using the original team-up training materials developed back in the 80s. These were being used for training of their staff. Things just don't seem to have changed. Training organizations don't seem to have updated themselves. And LogFrame capacity development is still very, very weak. I'm pleased to say that in CIDT we pride ourselves on being up to date, and over the years we've developed what we call a 7-step methodology, which doesn't just take people through LogFrames, it takes people right through project cycle management, from stakeholder analysis right through to budgeting, right through to work planning at the end of the process. And that process, we think, is a very important process. So very quickly, a few conclusions. We need to stop blaming the tool. It's us who need to change, and it's the way we use LogFrames that we need to really examine. They are a useful tool if used as what I call a thinking tool, a tool that challenges us, a tool that helps us make us think. They're very useful for facilitating processes, design processes, and facilitating active management of project management. And I think that's very, very important. But they do need to be used as a dynamic tool. And thirdly, as I've already said, they need to be used for lesson learning purposes. Accountability is important, but lesson learning, in my opinion, is a lot more important. And that's the bit we really should be focusing on. My final couple of points under conclusion are also quite important, I think. First of all, I think that staff in multilateral and bilateral agencies need to know how to use LogFrames. They are a tool of the trade. And in connection with that, all the suppliers, the private sector suppliers, non-government organizations, people supplying those agencies also need to know how to use LogFrames and to understand the advantages and the disadvantages of them. Connected with that, there are a number of older staff who might need to do a bit of refresher training. Staff, as I've said already, have become slightly entrenched in their views. They learned about LogFrames in some cases 10, 20 years ago, and some people haven't really updated themselves, and there's a need for development professionals to keep up to date with some of the more recent developments. In response to that, CIDT is offering a whole variety of training packages. We offer 1-day, 2-day coaching, mentoring sessions on the use of LogFrames, a really bespoke training for what is really needed. We're also very proud to have actually put a training program online. We would recommend this online training program is used as a sort of blended learning package where you have a face-to-face training following it. But I think it's a very useful package. It takes you through the basics of LogFrames, and we're finding that it's been very, very well received by people who are subscribing to it. So please do have a look, and good luck in your use of LogFrames.